because I go through my life now making sure that I am constantly aware that not everyone looks like me. Not everyone has the exact same challenges that I have, but that we all have them. And if we all have them, then we are all worthy of being included. We are all worthy of inclusion.
And so with that, now I turn it over to Rob Ross and Mary Triest.
So I think it was decided that I was going to go first. May 3rd, 1992, a friend called and said that Robert had had a diving accident. Chuck and I knew he was swimming in Santa Cruz with two friends, and actually also with somebody we had never met before. This new person, Chad, was the only member of the group who had life-saving training. And we discovered later that this was the first of 3 examples of Beshert that day, for which we continue to be incredibly grateful. First, because Chad had this training, he knew he needed to turn Rob over on his back when he was floating face down in the water. Secondly, a lifeguard station with a backboard was, from what I understand, about 100 feet or 100 yards, so nearby. And third, the fog lifted in time to fly Rob safely by life flight helicopter rather than driving him over the mountains from the ER in Santa Cruz to the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. So we got this phone call, and the first thing we did, of course, was find someone to watch the dog. And somehow we drove to Santa Clara. The first time we saw Rob in bed in the hospital, we were devastated. Not only was his broken neck in traction, but there was a black line drawn horizontally across his chest, below which he had no feeling or movement. And that image, that black line, remains with me 30 years later. The first day and in the following months, we made many phone calls to family, to friends, and of course to Temple Sinai. During the next months, and felt like years, but Chuck and I visited Rob daily in hospitals from Santa Clara, then to Vallejo, and finally to Redwood City. I think it was the other way around. Anyway, it was a long time before I could say the P word for paralyzed, or even the Q word for quadriplegic. I actually could not use those words. I had a feeling of a sense of unreality and denial, mixed with overwhelming sadness, but still that gratitude that Rob was there and he was alive. And through it all, we learned an entirely new vocabulary relating to spinal cord injuries. Phone calls and visits in this non-email time were our lifeline through Rob's surgery and the many months of rehab. Rabbi Chester wrote a heartfelt letter to the Temple Sinai congregation, appealing for support, emotional support, but also financial, and funds to help with the purchase of an accessible van. We received help from so many congregants, most of whom we'd never met or even didn't even know their names in some cases, and some who remain very special friends today. Congregants made and delivered meals. One helped set up a supplemental trust. Another congregant, and she knows who she is, accompanied me to Social Security, and several sponsored us with a Hebrew free loan. Fast forward to 2001, when I became Temple Sinai president. Rob will kind of fill in the dates in between. I knew that I wanted to share our family's gratitude with Temple Sinai. I attended a Union of Reform Judaism 2-day workshop on how to transform a congregational caring committee into a caring community. So with the help of Rabbi Chester, Dan Fandel, Sue Bachman, and many others, We created temple neighborhoods to support congregants in times of joy and in times of sorrow. And I'm so pleased to see that that caring community is still strong, going. I continue to be grateful for so many things. I'm grateful for each day. I keep an ever-growing gratitude list in my phone, and you wouldn't believe how long it's gotten. I basically do it by months. I'm grateful for my husband and my daughter. I'm grateful for the bluebirds who come to our feeders. I'm grateful for the delight of watching our son live his life with fulfilling work, a loving relationship, and a wonderful child, our granddaughter.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. Thanks, Ma. First of all, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for having us. We were asked to be here because it is February, which of course means it's Super Bowl. So that's why we were here. It also happens to be Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. And since the Browns aren't in the Super Bowl, I decided to speak a little bit more about Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. That's a mouthful, right? Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. In fact, they've added another A to the whole thing. There's Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. And that's a lot to unpack. So I'd like to just start a conversation. We'd like to start a conversation and then leave plenty of time for conversation and question and answer, and hopefully questions that do not remain answered and that will hopefully endure. It's interesting to hear how your life that you live impacts those around you. So to hear my mother tell her story about how my disability at the time of my accident in particular impacted her is jarring. And yet it's something that all of us, I think, can relate to, right? There are many of us who may have a particular quote unquote disability, but there are so many of us who also have come from it from the other side, who have seen that black line, metaphorical or physical, in someone that they love, in their lives, family, friends, loved ones. My disability started on May 3rd, 1992. My education continues to this day. And my awareness hopefully will last until my last breath. When I dove into the ocean back then, I had no clue that I would be engaged on an almost 30 years in May educational extravaganza, so to speak, in difficulty, in challenge, in acceptance, in love, in gratitude. And I think you will hear both of us speak a lot about gratitude. But taking a step back, that day was very much a blur to me. I know what happened before it. We went down to go swimming, dove into the ocean, everything went numb. I was face down. I had no clue why my arms and legs weren't moving or why I couldn't feel them. And I also knew that I was running out of air. And my chest started tightening and tightening and tightening, and I knew that I was going to die. That was it. No bright lights, no booming, "This is Adonai Hashem, come." That was it. It was a very clear knowing that my life was over. And again, as my mother shared, Chad saved my life about what I estimate now to be about 10 seconds away from running out of air. Those 10 seconds have shaped so much of my perspective on the following 30 years. Those 10 seconds fill my soul with gratitude every single day. And while, yes, I have a disability, and it is very easy to see mine. You can't see it because I'm in a nice, neat little box here. But were I to back up, you'd see my wheelchair. And when you see me rolling down the street as I run over your toes, you would see my disability and feel it as well. But disability comes in so many shapes and sizes. And disability tends to be, from my perspective, a very limiting word. Disability puts us in a box. There are massive statistics of 1 in 5 Americans have some sort of a physical disability, whether it's mobility, sight, hearing, learning, or developmental. Another 1 in 4 of us suffer from mental health condition, anxiety, stress, sadness, you name it. But I think every single one of us has gone through times in our lives. The way that I like to think about it, in fact, I was speaking with my daughter's school on Wednesday, and the only way that I could come up with the way to explain to them what disability really is and how universal it is I went over to the stairs that they all use to walk into the room, and I slammed into them. It was a big, nice laugh. And I turned around and said, well, that's not going to do it. And I backed up and slammed into the step. And ages all the way from kindergarten, all the way up through 8th grade, said, use the ramp. Use the ramp. That is inclusion. When a step this big becomes your disability, when a step this big becomes your challenge, physical or metaphorical, then we all share in the word disability, but we all share in challenges. And what I've learned over these 30 years is that when people come up to me, they'll start to tell their story, and they'll always couch it. I know it's not as bad as yours, Rob. I know this has nothing, but, and then they'll start, and I'll stop them mid-sentence. Don't do that. I want to hear your story. Tell me what's going on, and the stories that they tell, and the pain that they have felt, whether it's current, past, or present, means and has shown me that the challenges that we all face are universal. And when we discuss the word disability, it's so much more, for me, important in this month, and hopefully carries out throughout our lives, to discuss the awareness and the inclusion portion of Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. Because how can we be aware of those who don't look like me in a wheelchair, those who don't necessarily have a visible challenge in front of them, but those of us who have them within us, those of us who have family members, those of us who are going through challenges in our lives, loved ones, and ourselves that may not be seen. And that involves awareness. And awareness is the most important of all. Before you can be included, before you can have inclusion or access or become one of, you must open up your eyes physically and metaphorically and be aware. And that takes on such deep meaning for me, because I go through my life now making sure that I am constantly aware that not everyone looks like me. Not everyone has the exact same challenges that I have, but that we all have them. And if we all have them, then we are all worthy of being included. We are all worthy of inclusion. And that, to me, is what this month really celebrates, is that to be included, to make sure that we can give tzedakah and perform tikkun olam and be menschkeit and mitzvah and whatnot, all the things that we try to do to be good people, to help those who are going through challenges of their own, family, personal, or otherwise, need to be included, need to find inclusion. It starts with awareness, and it will end and continue with inclusion. And that's my spiel from the start. But again, I would invite a conversation to take place if you are so willing to unmute yourself and ask either one of us. We would love to answer questions, whether it's about disability in itself, ours or yours, and share and have a conversation with you all.
Thank you so much, Rob and Mary, for the moving words. What we're going to do is, if you want to ask a question in chat, I'm happy to read it for you. You can also, there are reactions. If you're able to use those at the bottom of your screen, you'll see like a smile face with a little star up here. If you press on that, there's a raise hand option. You can do that to get in line. The way Zoom works, I can't see everybody's screen, so I won't necessarily, I'll try to keep looking back and forth. But if you're raising your hand, we might not see you. And I just, I do have a couple of questions that we received ahead of time, and I'll ask maybe one of those now and maybe another a little bit later. But I do want to pick up on what Rob said about that tiny little step, be it metaphoric or real. We don't know where those little steps are. We know where some of them are, but there's no way that we, and I mean all of us, despite what our accessibility is like, all of us don't notice somebody else's little step. So if you want to help remove those little steps to make sure that inclusion is real and accessibility is real, the Access Committee does need more members. Denise Jacobson and Neil Jacobson, really Denise, they've been really pushing it along for many, many years. And we would love to have more people get involved and help us take away those seen and unseen little steps. And so I'll start with one of the questions I received ahead of time, which is, how did your view of disability change from before and after Rob's accident?
Ma?
Oh, well, you got me with a Ricola in my mouth, sorry. How did my position, how did my feeling about disability change? Truthfully, I noticed curb cuts and I had noticed certain things, but it was not here. And it wasn't even here. I have to stand up, this is my heart. But with his accident and certainly with his rehab and knowing what went on and what was involved in his getting all that rehab, especially from Vallejo, which is just an incredible to see what people were able to do, to look at and talk to the physical therapists, the therapists, a much broader sense of just his world, but my world. And again, for it really to go from here and maybe to my gut, to my kishkas, was a big deal and took a while. Rob?
And for me, it's interesting because my journey went from, kind of spanned the 5 stages of grief, or the 25 stages of grief, as we keep doing them over and over and over again, right, in our lives. But for me, disability meant nothing at 18 years old. Why would it? Certainly not personalized. And at that age, unfortunately, we tend to think of ourselves first. As we grow up, we start to discover things. So when I first broke my neck, I remember very clearly being in the hospital and having my friends come and visit me and crying over my bed, family members, friends, you name it. And just, and my job really at that time was to tell them that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I didn't buy it for a second at first. And yet my job was to say, it's going to be okay. Why? Because what else was I going to say to them? And yet the act as if, right? Anyone who's in a 12-step program will let you know that act as if is a huge tenet. For me, acting as if turned from it's going to be okay to it's okay. And my view now of not only my disability, which is very, very narrow, to the way I see it now, as I mentioned, which is incredibly broad, is something that I would not have had were I not to have and be in this current state. For me, disability is less important in my life as a concept. It is certainly an everyday get up in the morning, have to get dressed. Who's going to be the one getting me dressed? Oh my gosh, I don't have a home health aide today. Is that a pink spot on my butt? Oh my God, what does that mean? That's disability for me. But disability has changed so much more because I, again, truly believe that we all have disability has turned from disability to challenge. And the universality of challenges, that thing that is in front of us that helps, that we need just the touch of help and assistance of others, is what congregations were built to do, right? We have an opportunity, a holy community, to reach people during their highest highs, but also during their lowest lows. And that, all of us joining together on a night like tonight, all of us sending and saying names for Misha Berach, saying Kaddish, visiting those, caring committee, access committee, you name it, really does then expand that community to include us all. And whether you do or don't classify your challenge as a disability, you may already have one and just don't know it.
I'm going to read, because I know while you're talking, it's not easy to see the chat. I'm going to read a question that has come in. Please tell us about the time, soon after your initial recovery, that you returned to Bishop O'Dowd as a director of the Diary of Anne Frank. We attended and I introduced my then very young sons to you. I explained that you, a grown-up director, as was once my wild and crazy camper, Camp Sophiem, which they also attended. It made a huge impression on them, and the production was wonderful. Thank you for always staying yourself, Robin. So I think the question is, if you could share that time that you returned to Bishop O'Dowd as director.
Sure. As some of you know, but not all of you know, before my accident, I was a musician. I played the piano. I played guitar. I carried around drumsticks because I desperately wanted to be a drummer, but could not figure out how to make all four of my limbs operate independent of themselves. But I was also an actor, and thought that a month after my accident, theoretically, I would be moving to New York to become an actor, or as we like to put it, the best out of work waiter in New York City. And the real question at that time, once I kind of put my brain back together again, a process, by the way, which takes a heck of a lot longer than when they put your body back together again, and a process that I'm still undergoing to this day and will hopefully continue, was what do I do? How can I do? And in rehab, they have a very regimented what you must do when you are in rehab. You have to learn to be able to sit up. You have to learn to be able to, for your disability level, you have to learn to be able to be in a wheelchair and how you're going to operate it and stop putting holes in our walls and, you know, all the normal stuff that goes in rehab. And I thought that my life was going to be what it was before. And my mother can tell you that on a very memorable night, one that is ingrained in both of our heads, because it's the first night that I ever cried after my accident, was when my then girlfriend broke up with me at the time. And I'm so grateful that she did. It was time to go off to college. It was not through malice. It was through life change. it was time to go to college, and I was there in rehab. And we remain best of friends to this day. But that was the aha moment of life is not going to be the same for you, kid. What's next? And I went to the head of the physical therapy department there at rehabilitation. I told them that I wanted to learn how to sing again, because that's all I had. These hands weren't playing piano unless I was going to be banging out something that sounded like a cat walking across the keys. And so I went and I added to my therapy. They said that it would be absolutely fine as long as I did all of my regimented occupational and physical therapy if I tried to learn to sing again. And that is how I found my way back to the world. I found my way back to myself through my voice and through finding the breath that I so quickly almost lost. That breath became breath for speech, and most importantly, became breath for song. So when I was able to be in that process of trying to figure out what's next, I had the opportunity to go back to Bishop O'Dowd, where my life mentor, not only my theater mentor, but my life mentor, Dennis Colas, invited me back to direct. It was his master plan that I would take over the theater department for him. And he very slowly learned to transition me from an actor to a director. And so I ended up at Bishop O'Dowd directing that production of Anne Frank that you mentioned. I'm so grateful that you remember that. And then going on from there, still thinking that I would be in the theater as a director. And that's actually what brought me out to Ohio. I came out to Ohio to go to Oberlin College to study liberal arts and eventually directing. And along the way, life had other plans. And September 11th happened. A seminal moment, right, for all of us. And another one of those aha moments where we get jarred from where we think we are and what we think we know. And I left my job in the theater and I traveled the country for an entire year. When I came back from that, I knew that I didn't want to be in the theater anymore. And I started searching for my next journey.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. Very interesting. I'm going to ask I'm getting a bunch of direct messages that have questions, so I'm going to read those. One says, I would love to know what the panelists think about ableism rather than disability. I realized that I probably sat with Rob in the wheelchair section of Memorial Stadium on at least one Saturday when he was teaching theater at O'Dowd.
I've talked a lot. Ma, you want to? No? Okay. Sure. Keep talking, kid. That's a really tough question to ask because I stand on the shoulders of those who came before me. We all do, right? But by the time I was in a wheelchair, there were many ramps for me to go up, and that hasn't always been the case. I don't get too caught up in terminology because I try to go past terminology. I have no problem if someone calls me disabled, if someone says I have a disability, if someone says I'm confined to a wheelchair. My friends and I can sometimes even use pejorative terms for, I won't mention them here because it's Shabbat, but pejorative terms for being in a wheelchair. And for me, the language is so much less of a pervasive issue than the thinking behind it. If the words that come out of your mouth, even if they are meant in the best sense, hurt the person on the other side, then going back to my original moment of speaking, you can do a little bit better of a job being aware. and your awareness can open up just a touch more. And if you can see potential hurt in their eyes, then your job should be to ask a question. And why? And how are you? And what can I do? And what's going on? And to me, that is so much more of a prevalent issue for me that I try to live by than I do by words. To me, it's all about action.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask these in the order that they came. So I'm seeing some that are privately sent to me, and then some I'll read that are public. So the next one in order is an anonymous question. Does Rob have any suggestions about how to deal with an invisible mental disability that sometimes causes unintended rudeness? Is it useful to tell friends about it in advance?
So Rob, Rob doesn't know how to answer that question, because there is no right and there is no wrong answer to that question. I have found with my own condition, my own disability, my own life circumstance, that I welcome any and all questions. My life is literally an open book. I made sure to tell the kids when I was there on Wednesday that make sure you ask questions. And they started from, what does your chair do, all the way to, I say, and who wants to know how I pee? Because for me, when you ask questions of someone, and when people ask questions of me, I stop being another. I stop being the other, better said. And we start to now connect. And I said to the kindergartners, what's the first thing you do when you don't know someone? What's the first thing you do? And all of them knew exactly what to do. You ask their name. How about we start there? How about we start by asking someone's name, and we go from there? And so to sidestep the question a little bit, I would say that it's each person's personal comfort level. If that person is comfortable disclosing to someone that they trust, someone that they think will be in a safe place, whatever their challenge may be, mental illness was this particular one, then I welcome that. And if it is something that you feel is something that you want to hold within, and to slowly start to reveal that to people through the form of question and through awareness, then I would say that's probably best as well. It's really a personal choice.
Quite agree. Another one, any times where someone has made a gesture or accommodation to you because of your challenge that you did not appreciate?
Oh, no, never, not once. Because in the form of the question was the answer, right? It was a what? A gesture. How do you say no to a kind gesture? Meant to be inclusive, meant to be aware. If I take personal affront to it, then I can work on that when I go home. But that person has made a gesture to me, and I have, if it is a gesture made in good faith, then I accept it with pure gratitude and love.
Thank you. That's beautiful. So this one's from Mary. What motivated Mary's thinking to start the Access Committee?
Good question. Denise is smiling. It was something that, certainly I talked about when I went to this special 2-day retreat as part of a biennial and learned about the caring community. And as an outgrowth of that, it was something, none of us does this alone. So it wasn't alone. It was with Denise, especially, certainly Neil. help me, Denise, if there was anybody. I think Helen Smiler was maybe there from the beginning. No, she's shaking her head no. Okay, but it feels like you were. But it was a necessity, and to begin with, literally access to the Bema. I mean, that was like the physical part of, and what parts of Temple Sign and what parts of the building can be more accessible. I'm not sure. I mean, we are still members of the temple. I don't know what's happening with a lot of things. I think the word inclusion is something that's very special to me. And it means more than having access to something, it's being included in it.
Put your hands down.
I can't. My husband says I talk with my hands too much, but yes, we know I do. And my son's laughing.
I'm laughing because all of a sudden I heard a voice out.
Yeah, he's sitting here.
It was like God, put your
Right.
hands down.
Put your hands down.
It's okay, Dad. Talk
It's
to the
okay.
hand.
Hello.
Hi,
It's
Pa.
hard to do that. I don't know what's going on with my light, but so I don't, as I say, I don't know what's happening with the access committee now. It would be wonderful if more people with more vision of things could help Denise and Neil and Robin and Helen. Because again, it's inclusion. And this is something that the synagogue that we belong to for, well, I think 10 of the 13 years we've lived here, maybe not quite that long. The rabbi gave a high holy day talk, let's just make this shorter, but about how his wife had broken both feet and how she had to be in a wheelchair, and his perspective completely changed. And so he wanted to do something different. And he and I talked, and I reluctantly agreed to be the chair of this committee. It was called, and I don't know if they're still doing it, I hope, the Inclusion Committee. It was not called an Access Committee. And I think, as I say, access is the first step. Certainly, I can't. Certainly awareness, as Rob says, absolutely. But but it's what parts of the temple can we all be included in? Is there someone who needs a Braille Siddur? Is there someone who needs some way to hear what's going on in services? So it's not for me to tell you, but I know Denise is nodding all the way through this. So yes, and Robin, it's definitely time.
So I'm conscious of the time. We have 6 minutes. I want to quote Neil Jacobson on something that he said once that really struck with me, is that people really want to feel needed. People want that their presence and what they do is, and I'm not saying it as articulately as he did, that it has to be needed by the community. And that's why, having a job and having work is so important to so many people. And I was really struck, actually, my brother is on this call, my younger brother, I was kind of teasing him about, with teasing somewhat serious, with wanting him to move out here where I live. And the first thing he said is, well, where would I work? So again, like in thinking about inclusion, it's not just giving people access to the synagogue, but recognizing that how much we need every member and making sure every member has a way to actually contribute and be needed by the synagogue. So we have 5 minutes. I'm going to read. I'm going to give. I know we're going slightly out of order, and I think Sarah will understand. I'm going to read what Neil wrote, and then I'll see if we have time for Sarah's question. So Neil says, for me, inclusion means asking people with disabilities to help you. Everyone needs to feel needed. Our son, David, a baby, made me feel the most accepted and included. He wasn't aware of my disability. When he was hungry, he didn't ask if I was able to feed him. He cried and demanded that I find a way to feed him. I felt needed. Like I said, Neil can say it much more articulately than me. So Sarah asks, some friends with disabilities, typically those who are born with the disability, are proud and happy to identify as disabled. Other friends with disabilities, more typically those who were disabled later in life, are traumatized, depressed by having a disability. It is hard sometimes to know how to be supportive to the latter type of friend when I'm greatly influenced by the philosophy of the former type of friend. Any suggestions? And again, we have about 4 minutes. This will be the last question, and hopefully the answer will be brief.
Well, then you're talking to the wrong guy. God, what a wonderful last question. I, as someone who had a disability, had an accident in his 18th year of life. I've now been living with a disability longer than I was without it. And that said, my life will always be colored by both sides of May 3rd, 1992. And I think that those of us who, those who may have a disability, whether it's 30 years, 50 years, or 12 hours, we all need time to accept. We all need time to come to peace with ourselves. Whatever it is that we may have a challenge with, these things don't just magically become okay. And it's okay for it not to be okay. We live in a society that tells you, well, you got to buck up, pull yourself by your bootstraps. You're going to get on with it, move on, be okay. So, what's wrong with you? Why are you sad? Why are you stuck in this? And I don't live by that in any reality. Reality for me means ups and downs. Disability, challenges, not being included is a daily, sometimes hourly thing for me. I have a great morning and a horrible afternoon. And I know everyone can relate to these sort of things. We go through our lives, whether they are colored by a huge, massive event or by small paper cuts, we all bleed and we all feel pain. And we can all address that pain, whether that pain happened a long time ago or that pain is happening right now, by hopefully reaching out to those who love us and forming a community that will see to it that we will always be included.